Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and today's book event, Stolen, with the author Ann-Helén Laestadius, and will be moderated by Mathilde Magga. Stolen is published by Simon Schuster and is available now in translation by Rachel Willson-Broyles. This talk is being recorded and will be made available on our website, scandinavias.org, as well as our YouTube page. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section, and we'll get to them towards the end of the book. You can also purchase the book at your local bookstore, and I'll also put a link in the chat box where you can purchase the book online. Ann-Helén Laestadius is an author and journalist from Kiruna, Sweden. She is of Sámi and Tornedalen descent, two of Sweden's national minorities. In 2016, Laestadius won the prestigious August Prize for Best Young Adult and Children's Novel for 10 Past 1. She was also awarded the Norrlands Literature Prize for 10 Past 1. Stolen is her first adult novel, and it was named Sweden's Book of the Year. Moderating today is Mathilde Magga, a Sámi woman from Tromsø in northern Norway. She has spent the past 5 years studying in the Seattle area and earned a BA at Pacific Lutheran University in 2020, and her MA in English literature with a focus on indigenous literature from the University of Washington in 2022. She is currently working on her PhD in literature, also at University of Washington, where when she's not working on her PhD project, she spends most of her time working on a book project that she hopes to be published in both Norwegian and Northern Sámi. So please welcome Ann-Helén and Mathilde.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. We're very excited. I have recently just read this actually in Norwegian and then in English. I'm very excited to talk about it today. So we were thinking maybe you could start with reading a passage from the book, first in Swedish, so we could kind of hear how the language is working, and then in English. And then I would love to hear just a little bit about how this story came to life.
Okay, yeah. I will read a little bit from the first chapter. It's when Elsa is skiing by herself to the reindeers. And she's like excited to be there first on her own. But is she the first one on the place? Maybe not. Ljudet av en skotermotor som startade fick henne att stanna tvärt. Den besvikelsen, hon hann inte hit först. Skoten stod stilla på tomgång. Hon tryckte nästan ljudlöst ifrån med stavarna. Tog tag i stammen på en tall och kikade försiktigt fram. Det var han. Hon sa aldrig hans namn. I hans mun, mellan spända läppar, fanns det mjuka duniga. I hans hand en kniv med blod på. Elsa nöp så hårt om stavarna att de kalla knogarna i vantarna värkte. The sound of a snowmobile starting up halted her in her tracks. Such a disappointment. She wasn't the first one here after all. The snowmobile was idling. She pushed off with her poles, almost silent, then grabbed the trunk of a pine and peered around it. It was him. She never said his name. In his mouth, between taut lips, was something soft and downy. In his hand, a bloody knife. Elsa squeezed her pole so hard, her cold knuckles ached inside her mittens. He took the piece of ear from his mouth and stuffed it into the pocket of his grimy yellow pants, the kind road construction workers wore. The wide reflective strips flashed as he passed in front of the snowmobile's headlights. The dead calf lay next to the fence just outside the corral. He bent down, for what? To take it with him. Her throat betrayed her, and he looked up. His eyes were searching, quick and deft, until he found her. Maybe he wouldn't recognize her with her silver hair. It looked like he was swearing, stomping towards her in his boots. His tongue bulged behind his upper lip, pressing against the snooze to release the nicotine. Then he grinned and pointed at her, holding an index finger to his thin lips. Shh, before drawing his finger across his throat. Death. She knew that that meant death.
Wow, thank you for reading that. That's a very powerful section already in the beginning. So where did this story start for you? Was this something that you planned to write for a while, or how did this story came to be?
Yeah, I started to think about this book about 7-8 years before I actually wrote it. My mother is from a reindeer herding family, and I have cousins that are reindeer herders. And I knew that there were a lot of problems, and I had heard about them getting their reindeers killed. So I started to follow some of them on social media, and I got to see some horrific pictures of their reindeers being found, killed, and tortured. And then I contacted some of them, and I went out with them to the forest, and I was with them when they were with their reindeers, and they told me about all the things that was happening, and how this was very threatening and awful in many ways. And eventually I met up with this young woman. Her name is Sarah, and she gave me 100 police reports that her sameby had made. And she told me that the police hadn't investigated any of them. So when I got these police reports, then I knew that this is hard fact. Now I have the truth, and now I can start to write and do this story about Elsa and her friends and cousins. So it's based on reality, and it's very much based on people that I have met. But I had to be careful. I couldn't point out exactly where this is happening, because I was afraid that the reindeer herders that had spoken to me would get in trouble. So it was, it was kind of hard to write this book, but also very necessary for me to do it.
Yeah, wow. That made me think about, when you're saying have to be careful about kind of what to say and what not to say. And it's actually something I was thinking about when I was reading this book, right? There's in this first section that you read, she's threatened to silence. And throughout many parts of the book, right, it's always this question of when to speak and when not to speak, right? Both with her family, with the police, with the media. So I was just wondering if is this like this theme of silence versus speaking up, is that something you wanted to explore, or is that something that just kind of came out as you were writing?
This is something that I'm very that I have been thinking about a lot, because there is a problem with the silence in the Sámi community. And the silence is a way of protecting yourself and protecting your children. You maybe don't want them to know how hard it is. Like Elsa in the book, she kind of knows that something is going on, but her parents, they don't want to tell her. She's only 9 years old when the book begins. And this is a way of protecting your children. And many of the reindeer herders that I also talked to, this was like the biggest heartbreaking part for them, to have to tell their children that there are people out there that doesn't like Sámi, that doesn't like the reindeers and the reindeer herding. So I think that the silence is very dangerous. I understand that you can't tell these kind of things to a young child like when they are too small, but the silence is a problem, because many of the reindeer herders that are facing these problems are getting the reindeers killed and are fighting with mining companies taking their lands, and the climate changes and the Sámi hatred. Many of especially the young men, are forced to be so strong, and they have to be like these macho kind of men, and they don't talk to anyone about how they feel and if they are afraid, or so they are very lonely in one way. And I think the silence is very dangerous, and I think it causes a lot of mental illness also, when you can't express your fears and your sorrow. So that is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. My first thought was that I want to write a book for the Sami themselves. I want them to find themselves in this book. I want them to hear their language, see their places, and be in the life that they understand and recognize. And I was hoping that this would make them talk to each other. Like, I read this book. Have you read it? And maybe this could start up a conversation. So yeah, the silence is dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's just such a one of like the most fascinating parts about this book for me, right, is seeing that there's not a right or wrong answer to this, right? We kind of, when they start talking or when they stay silent, we kind of get to see the difficult consequences, right, of when you are 9 years old, right? How are you supposed to survive in a space that's so hostile? So that was really impactful for me. And so I guess I was also wondering that you did start the story with Elsa being just 9 years old, and then you jump to 10 years later on in the book. And that was very impactful for me. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your choice to write her both as 9 and then I guess 19 later on.
Yeah, I thought it was important to see what this kind of things does to a child, and to understand her actions when she is around 19, 20 years old. You have to understand what she has been through as a child. And for me, I'm always very close to the child in every book I write. I think it's very important how we bring up our children, how we treat them, and how we talk to them or not talk to them, and what consequences that will bring. So writing about Elsa as a child was very important for me, because I wanted the readers to really feel how it is to be a child and to be hated for being a Sámi, and to be finding your animals killed in the most brutal way. So yeah, it was absolutely necessary to do like that. And also, it's not only Elsa. I have other perspectives also, like her big brother, who is 16 when the book is starting, and then he is 26, and also her best friend's mother, who's in her 30s and 40s. So yeah, I try to, and also of course Robert Isaksson, the man who is one of the men who is killing reindeers. So it was, but Elsa is the main voice in the book. Of course, she's the one who's the readers get to follow the most.
And that's what I think also is so fascinating and important about the book, right? That you get to see how it affects different people at different ages, and how they all have this kind of brutal thing together that they have to handle. And so I think family dynamics, right, is a central part to this novel. And I mean, I think it's important too, right, that it's not just Elsa and her parents and brother, right? We're really talking, about the bigger community and their care for each other, her best friend's mom, all of these people kind of feel like, relatives, relations. And so, everyone is worried about what is going on and how it's affecting everybody else. Kind of the burden of wanting to protect each other, but maybe not being able to do that in such a hostile environment, in the way that they want. You kind of see everybody struggle with trying to protect each other. So can you talk a little more about writing, such intimate and special, close relationships in such a hostile environment? Like, how was it dipping into those family dynamics?
Yeah, it's very special to be living in these small villages. Everybody knows everybody. You know who is related to who, you know who has been doing what in the previous. So it's hard to get away from your own history in a way. Like in the book, everybody suspects or knows that it is Robert Isaacson that is killing the reindeers, but nobody dares report him to the police. Nobody dares talk about this because he's a very scary person, but also because it's your neighbor. If you do report him to the police, the punishment for killing a reindeer is like a fine, or not even that, because the police aren't investigating. So the risk is that you are going to face him the next day in the store when you're getting your groceries and so on. So, and that is really hard, of course. So you don't want to tell on your neighbors. But this, I grew up in Kiruna, and in that town there were about 26,000 people when I was growing up. Now it's around 23,000. But the small villages outside of Kiruna is very much home to me also, especially the village that my parents are from, Nedre Soppero. So I get all my inspiration from these villages. So when I was writing Stolen, I went back home and I was at a river doing salmon fishing, and I was walking around in the villages and hearing everybody speak in Sámi, in Finnish, in Meänkieli, and Swedish also, of course. And this environment is so special to me. And the closeness that we have, like the relatives, are the most important thing for us Sámi people. So for me now, living here in Solna outside of Stockholm is really tough because I always want to go back to my home. So that is also a reason why I write these books. It's kind of being homesick, and I get to tell these stories from home. But I also think it's good that I'm not living there, because then I can have a look like I'm looking at it from the outside. So I'm a little bit kind of protected also, being away from it. So because it was kind of scary writing this book, I didn't know how people would react. But writing these family relations, and that is very important to me. And I'm very interested in these kind of things. What happens when you keep a secret, and what happens when you actually then starts to speak out and try to fight the police and fight the power in different ways. What will happen to you then, and so on. So will the family stand there with you, or will they not? So
yes, absolutely. And I just really relate to you of, what it means to be away from home and doing, thinking about these things and kind of writing a family. So yeah, that's really, really impactful. And I just, that was what I was thinking as I was reading this book, is like, what is, and I think what maybe the characters are thinking about the whole time too is, how is this going to affect, I think that we always, as a lot of indigenous peoples or minorities in general, we have to think 5 steps ahead, right? As in, if I say this, or if I write this, or if I do anything, how will that affect my children, my parents? What are all of these next steps? And I think that's such a powerful, you can see it in Elsa as a 9-year-old already. And you can also see it in her parents, her neighbors. Everybody's thinking about how will all of my actions affect everybody else? And I think that's just a very maybe important thing for not just us Sámi people, right, to recognize and see ourselves, but also to a lot of others to realize kind of what's going on, like why are we thinking the way that we're thinking, and then maybe why. I think a big thing going through this book is, will Elsa tell what happened? Why or why not? And kind of see the complexities in all of that. So that's just, there's a lot of important things going on here, I think. So I was wondering also, before in the past, you have written books, children's books. So I was wondering both what made you want to do a book for adults, but maybe also how was that transition going from children's books and then writing in a book for adults?
I was thinking about writing a book for adults from the beginning. That was my dream. I had dreamt about being a writer and author for many, many years since I was a child. But then there was this book contest or a script contest where they were looking for a book script that was about how it is to be a young Sami today. And this was in 2007. So when I saw this competition, I decided to try and write the story that I had with me for so many years. I wanted to tell a story about a girl, her mother, and her grandmother. So I just had to do it in a quite different way, but still it was the story that I wanted to tell. So I wrote it in 2 weeks and I sent it into the to the publishing house that was doing this competition, and I won. And so my first book was out, and it was called SMS from Soppero, like a text message from Soppero. And then I thought it was so fun to write for young adults, for kids, and I get to go out in schools and talk to the students, and I felt also it was really important to tell young children about the Samis and the Sami community, because the knowledge is not that good in Sweden. They don't teach you that much in school. So I felt that I had a mission here. I wanted to teach people about the Sami. And also I wanted to write books for young Sami people. Like when I wrote Stolen, I had the same main goal, that I wanted young Sami people to find themselves in this book, to recognize themselves. And so I wrote 4 books about this girl, Agnes, and then I wrote 2 books about a young girl living in Kiruna that is a Tornedalian, about her issues. I don't know if you know, but Kiruna is actually moving. The whole city has to move because of the big mining company that have found a lot of iron ore underneath the city. So the city has to move. And this is also a very complex and hard issue for the Sami in the area, because they are forced to move with their reindeers. Then when I wanted to write Stolen, I knew that I wanted to write a pretty brutal story. And I thought I couldn't write it as brutal as I wanted if I was going to write it for children or young adults. Young adults can read Stolen, of course, but for children in like 9 to 12, 13 years. So that's the reason why I decided to then try my dream to write for an adult readers. And it was, it was not that different, I think. Maybe you don't explain everything like you do when you write for children. You have to read between the lines, as we say in Sweden. So I think that it was necessary to do it for the adults. But I do know that there are actually a lot of kids and schools reading this book. There is a Sami school in Gällivare, a little bit south of Kiruna, in the north of Sweden, and the teachers that I met there, they were reading this book to students that were like 9-10 years, and I was kind of a little bit shocked. Are you really reading it to them? And she was so good, because she said, this is their life. This is what they are facing. So this is excellent for me to have a book to talk about these hard things with them. And that was all that I had been wishing for with this book. So I said, okay, you know what you're doing. So I hope they can take it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think even in the book, that question, gets kind of asked, or or thought about is the, like, should we try to protect the children? But then it's, Elsa's best friend's mom who says, but how are we going to do that? Right? This is happening. We can't keep them inside. We can't, this is impossible. So in some ways, right, I think there's this discussion of, what should we protect children from? But then again, we can protect them from this. So is it better to read about it and actually learn to talk about it and have, as you say, be open to a discussion and kind of, actually have words to express what's going on, and hopefully, as you said, the teacher know what they're doing, so that they can help kids kind of process what's going on, and hopefully talk more about it when they grow up, or so with that, what were some of the biggest challenges when trying to write this story?
I think the one thing I was most nervous about was getting all the reindeer herding things right, because I'm not grown up with that. Of course, I've been out with my cousins and seen it since I was a child, but that is one thing. It's a whole other thing to be a reindeer herder. So I was really doing my research very carefully, and I let all the reindeer herders that I had interviewed or been out with read some of the chapters to check that everything was all right. So that was, I think, the part that I was mostly worried about. And as I said earlier, I was also worried about people getting hurt, or more reindeers getting killed, or that it would have these kind of awful consequences. But so far it has been all right. Nobody has been abused or harassed or anything like that. So I'm very pleased about that. I think that was the main thing. I never have a plan when I start to write. I always go with my intuition and my gut feeling. And I go home and I have this special stone close to the Lainio River where I stand and where I listen. And then they come to me, my characters. I see scenes and I hear them speak in Sámi. I hear them speak in Meänkieli. And when I have been there for a while, then I start to write down little pieces in books or talk it into my phone. And then I start to write. If it goes well, if it goes it doesn't necessarily has to go fast, but if it flows and the story is there, then I know that I'm onto something. So I think I wrote Stolen about 100 pages before I had to start to do a kind of plan how it's going to end, because it's I won't spoil anything, but then I had to plan a little bit to get the ending correct. So sometimes I get the question if I want to have courses for people who wants to be writers, but I always have to say I can't, because I don't know how I do it. I just sit down and I write and it comes to me. So
That's funny. I was gonna you kind of answered my second question too, which is what the writing process was. So I think this is great. I think it's fascinating to hear kind of how some of these stories just kind of come out and how they just come to life. I bet it would be hard to think, where did this start, right? Because so much has happened.
And I have heard stories all of my life. Sámi people is a storytelling people. So my mother has told me stories since I was a little child. So I'm I always had a good imagination, but I also think that some of the things that I have written in my books comes from maybe her stories, maybe some other relative story that I maybe have forgotten that it came from them from the beginning. But somewhere it's in my head and it's in my mind. And I also have a strong feeling that I have relatives that are no longer with us. In some way they are with me, because I get these signs sometimes and they remind me of what I should write about. I think the environment that I have been growing up in is very important. Nature is very important to me, my relatives, my parents, my sister. I think it's absolutely necessary for me, the upbringing that I have.
So what has the reactions been so far, kind of to this book and to this, either from kind of inside the community or outside?
It's been really great. I'm so happy because a lot of reindeer herders has reached out to me and said that they really liked the book. And some of them have said that they couldn't read it because it was so hard, because it came too close. And it has also been brought up by politicians here in Sweden. And in the Sámi parliament also, they have been talking about this book. So I think it's been going really, really good. And people outside the Sámi community, outside Sápmi, many people have written to me and been like, they can't believe it. They are like, is this really happening? Especially in the south of Sweden, because the things that are happening in the north isn't always that interesting for media, but now it is. Things are changing here in Sweden, so it's getting more interesting. But people were like, I didn't know, how couldn't I know about this? Why isn't anybody telling us that this is happening? And not many people know about some history, because in the book also I write about Elsa's grandmother, who is talking about going to the nomadic school as a girl, and people are like, they don't know that these kind of things have happened to the Sámi people. And I'm so happy that my book is translated and getting out in the world, because I think it's so good that people get to know that Sweden isn't always the best country in the world. We are very proud of ourselves and saying we are such a democratic and good country, and Sweden is, but they don't take care of their indigenous people, and they have done us so much wrong for so many hundreds of years, and it's still affecting us. Some of the decisions that they made way back in time, like putting children in the nomadic schools, and so things are not as they seem to be. So I would say that even in Sweden, people are shocked when they find out how the government has treated their indigenous people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I keep encountering here as well, is, people expect, Scandinavia, that is the king of justice and equality. And so I think it's so important to understand more, to not just stop at, but Norway or Sweden is great, but like, this is actually happening. And understanding how this is affecting all of these generations. And I think a lot of people also maybe imagine that, this is just let's say the older generation experienced trauma and the younger generation are only dealing with that trauma. And it's like, no, there's things ongoing, right? As we see here with Elsa, it's not just happening to her grandmother, it's happening to her as well. And so she has to, in this book, deal with her trauma, right, of what happened to her, but then also understanding what happened to her grandmother and her parents, and trying to patch all of these things together. And I think that's such an important thing for people to see them try to navigate all of the things that have happened and are still unfortunately happening. So with that, when I read, Sámi literature or indigenous literature in general, I'm always interested in how to write a story about something that is very traumatic and is ongoing. And again, I won't either spoil the ending, but in general, right, a story from an indigenous or Sámi perspective it's usually ongoing, right? There's things that are happening still. They're traumatic, and there's violence and pain, right? But then there's, of course, also a will to continue, right? There's these people are fighting for their lives, they're fighting for their families. If you look through and notice what's also happening in this book, there's a lot of love and care for family, right? I think that's important to note that their goal is really that their relatives have the best lives possible, right? So there's pain and violence, but there's also strength and love, right, with this type of story. So how did you, I'm always curious how to balance, that violence with also strength, because I think these characters are incredibly strong. So how did you navigate this? Like, in a sense, how did you want to leave the readers, right? Of like, again, without, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but like, what type of effect or feeling did you want to leave the reader with this kind of ongoing story?
Oh, I don't really know, but I think I hope for a lot of different feelings, that you feel some kind of hope, but also maybe that you're angry and feeling sad because this is still happening. I just hope that people will feel something when they read my book. I think that when I wrote the book, it was really hard. It was so tough for me to write it because it is reality. And although it's fiction, of course, but when I wrote these characters, I saw the reindeer herders in front of me, and I felt their heartbreak and their sorrow. And I really want that to come across to the readers, that this is reality, and that this is happening, as you were saying. So I think that is what I hope for.
Yeah, I really like that response of you're not, just having them feel something, maybe whatever it is that they have to work through. And also what you said about some reindeer herders, this is just too close, right? But I think those are maybe the stories, right, that we need to tell, are the ones that are the painful. And just it's really hard. There's a lot of people who wouldn't be able to tell these types of stories, so who can, right? And because I think it is important. So and maybe in this type of story, right, we can't just say, oh, it's either only tragic or it's hopeful, or because there's so many things happening. So maybe we have to sort through it.
And it also was very important for me to also write about the internal conflicts in the Sámi community, that I'm also writing about Elsa's problems of being accepted as a full member in the Sámi, and her mother is not considered to be a true Sámi, and that kind of issues also, because I didn't want it to be a book where like the Sámi is the one who's all good and all the others are bad in some way, because it is complex. We are people and we all have our faults and problems, so that was also very important for me to write about, especially the women's rights and their like Elsa, she's really fighting for her right to be a reindeer herder, and some of the elder men isn't that happy about it and think that she should be the Sámi woman, being at home, taking care of children and fixing everything with at home, and not being out on a snowmobile. So that was also important, to give it like it's the truth. That's the way that it is.
Yeah, and I think if we hadn't added complexity, if you hadn't talked about some of these internal struggles, it would be too easy. It would be just good versus bad, but that's not what's going on at all. And I think we have to read and we have to talk about the things that are difficult, because if not, we're just not gonna deal with it or work through it at all.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly important. And so far, this book has been translated into many languages. I have my Norwegian and English copy here, and I know that I'm pretty sure that there's other languages as well. I also know that they just wrapped up filming for a movie on this book. So how has this journey been? How does it feel to have this story kind of go so far? Because I was thinking that while I can't remember ever seeing a book written, from a Sámi author and so fast going through translation and even movie adaptation, that's not really something that we see a lot in Sámi. So I was wondering how this journey has been for you, and what you might hope that this story can do or do for people who might live in the US or be far away from this community.
Oh my God, I was so happy when I got the call from my agent and she sold it to Netflix. So yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And I have been to the set and watched the film being made. And it was like so surreal, but also so fantastic to see Elsa and all of the other characters coming to life. And I'm so happy that they wanted to invest in this and that they really understood that here we have a story that's kind of untold in the movie business, because this is today. There has been some movies made about Sámi in the past, and so this is really interesting that they want to do a movie about something that is going on today, right now. Yes. And I am so happy when I was at the film set, the director, Elsa she's from Norway. And it was so great to hear her speak Sámi to the actors, because many of the actors are Sámi speaking. They are reindeer herders, so they are actually acting like themselves, many of them. And that is also so brilliant that it will be in Sámi, also of course in Swedish, because some of the characters speak Swedish, but mostly in Sámi. And I think this is so important. It is so important also for filmmakers in the future to see that this is possible, that there is an interest out in the world for our stories. So, and like with the book, I'm so glad that this will come out. Not everybody reads books, but I might get another audience with the movie. And again, they will see a different side of Sweden that they might not have been aware of. So yeah, this is so important.
Yeah. And I also love that you said, there's a bunch of very good Sámi movies, but all of them almost are about something that happened in the past, or at least, not right now. And I think that will be such a huge, because that's what I hear a lot, right? Is, in the past, what happened to you in the past? And not a lot of understanding about what's going on now.
Exactly.
And even as you said, I don't know if people maybe realize how important it is to go on a movie set and be able to speak Sámi. That's incredible, and I can just only imagine for the director and the actors what that feels like to be involved in a process where they're doing something, for Netflix, but it's done in their way, in Sámi, and that's so important. Those small, or it's not even a small thing, but it's huge. I think so.
Yeah, it's really huge, and I'm so happy because I have been able to read the script as it has been written, and they have been so willing to listen to me and to Ella-Maria, of course. And that is also, you feel safe. It's going to be good, and I think the way that they are doing it also, Ella-Maria told me when I went out with them to a lake near a mountain, and she said, like, we know how to thank this place and be thankful for being able to be filming here, and these kind of things are like, you know, I get goosebumps when she tells me, because this is exactly as it should be.
Yes.
So yeah,
Done the right way, done our way,
yes.
which is incredibly important.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if we're going, we should open for Q&A.
Yes, we have some questions here. First question is, I'm so glad that I read the book, and I'm wondering how your book has been received in Sweden, and has it provoked conversations in Sweden about the mistreatment of the reindeer, and most importantly of the Sámi people?
Yeah, one thing that I forgot to tell about, because I talked a little bit about that earlier, that it has been received very well, actually. But also, I feel that things are happening now. There are people are talking about the punishments you get if you kill a reindeer, because the book is called Stolen, because if you kill a reindeer, it's only considered to be a theft. So therefore, the police don't make an effort to investigate these crimes, because it's like a small crime. But now there are authorities here in Sweden that are going through and investigating how these reindeer killings are connected with maybe being a hate crime. And so this is very important. And also, I think it was last summer, the police actually went out with a helicopter to look when some of the reindeer herders called in and said that they had found dead reindeers. And this is very, very unusual. And I don't think it's only because of my book, but because I think that there has been more and more attention. The reindeer herders and the Sámi has been speaking out about this. And also there's been a TV show here investigating journalists that have been doing 2 programs about this that received a lot of attention. So I think things are happening, and I'm so glad if I'm only a little bit a part of this, but I hope things will change.
Excellent. And this one is from Sandra. She understands that the Sámi people and culture spans a number of countries: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and parts of Russia. Is there a country that is more respectful and responsive to the Sámi experience and their needs?
I think maybe you have a different opinion, Mathilde, but I think Norway is ahead of Sweden in many areas. Especially when it comes to literature. There are so much more books coming out in North Sámi in Norway, and they have much more understanding for the importance of having literature in our own language. And I also think that you might have come a little bit further in politics and other issues. And there recently was a lot of protests going on about windmills, but also in Sweden we have a lot of people protesting against mining companies and how the government is acting. But so I think Norway is a little bit ahead of Sweden. I don't know the situation that good in Finland and Russia. I would say I don't know nothing about, actually. Yeah.
Okay, and one more question. You address identity issues and who is recognized within the Sámi community as being Sámi. How different was it to write about this sensitive topic? Have you had any response about this, and any sense whether this might be opening a discussion about this issue in new ways?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I wanted to be an author and tell these Sámi stories, because I don't speak Sámi. I understand a lot, but my mother didn't want to teach me Sámi because of the fact that she was sent to the nomadic school. I don't know if you know about these schools, but they took the reindeer herding families' children when they were 7 years old and put them to these boarding schools where they no longer could speak Sámi, and that was the only language many of them knew. And they were taught that they were lesser worth people and their culture was not good. And this affected them really much. And when they grew up and had children of their own, they sometimes didn't want to pass on the language, and they felt ashamed, and they passed on this feeling of shame, and this has had some serious consequences for generations. So, and my father isn't a Sámi, he's of Tornedalian, and sometimes in the beginning when I was out with my books, there would be like these questions: why don't you speak Sámi? Could you be a Sámi if you don't speak Sámi? And your father isn't a Sámi, then you aren't a full Sámi, maybe you're a half Sámi. So these are the kinds of things that I have heard, and I really wanted to try to change this kind of view, because we say if you are Sámi, you feel like a Sámi, you are a Sámi. No one else can come and say you're not, and you should be like that, and you should have reindeers and so on. So this is very, very important for me to be talking about these issues and writing about them, and also about the feelings that it and it's also so sad that in a way when these conflicts are within the group, because I heard it also from other Sámis telling me that I wasn't good enough. And that really hurted me the most, that we in some way do the things and say the things that other people has told us, or our parents, or so it's so sad. So I'm working very hard to change this kind of point of view of being good enough.
Well, thank you. That's all the questions from us. I don't know, Ann-Helén, if you want to talk about what you're working on now. It's always interesting to hear.
Yes. Well, here in Sweden, my second book for adults were published in January, and it's called Straff in Swedish, Punished in English, and will also be out in the US eventually, and it's a book about the nomadic schools. So actually it's a story about Elsa's grandmother. She is in the book Punished. You get to know her as a child and why she is like she is now in Stolen. So it's a story about 5 children that you get to follow in the 50s and the 80s. So I mix the chapters. You were 50s, 80s, 50s, 80s. Because I thought it was very interesting to let people know how this affects you when you go to a nomadic school, and how it affects you as an adult, and also how it affects your children if you don't teach them Sámi, or you do teach them Sámi but they're having a hard time anyway. Yeah, this book has also been very challenging to write, because it's so personal, because my mother was sent to the boarding school, and but it made us talk. And it was really special, because there is a lot of silence about the nomadic schools. The ones who have been through it don't want to talk about it, because it's too hard, and it's so sad. And but I think it's important that we speak about these things. And I'm like 51 now, and now me and my mother, we have spoken about this for real. We have talked about it earlier, but I never dared ask her any questions, because I was so afraid of the answers that I might get, how bad it has been for her. So this book has also been nominated to Book of the Year, the prize that Stolen won. So I'm very glad about that. So it has received a lot of reviews in big newspapers, and I've been on all kinds of TV shows. So the interest here is really, really big, which is so much fun. So now I'm starting to write the third book. But not right yet. I have to go up to Lainio River and do the salmon fishing and listen to everybody before I can start write it. It's and this is a book that I can't speak about yet, but it's going to be tough, very tough to write it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, for joining us today, Ann-Helén, and Mathilde for moderating. It was a wonderful conversation. I would like to point out that Scandinavia House is currently hosting the exhibition Arctic Highways, which is 12 indigenous artists from Sámi, Alaska, and Canada. And that exhibition will be traveling. It will go out to Seattle after us. So in the fall, it will be at the the National Nordic Museum, and then it goes on to the American Swedish Institute in Minneapolis, and then it concludes its US tour in Santa Fe. So if you're in any of those countries or cities or close to them, I hope you see the exhibition as well. But thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. Please read the book. Please discuss it amongst your friends. So yes, thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was so fun.
Okay, thank
A lot of fun. Thank you so much for such a great conversation.
I love the questions.
Excellent. And hopefully, if you're in the US promoting Straff, we can make a stop in Scandinavia House too. So.
Oh, that would be great. I would love to come to you. Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye. Have a good day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.